We're going to go ahead and get started. Yeah, thank you all again so much for being here. It's a real pleasure. We're so thrilled to have you with us. And this is our first ever CalTrout Migration Matters webinar. And we're really excited to be offering this and hope it'll kick off a routine of more frequent webinars. Just to introduce myself really briefly, I'm Molly Ansell. I'm California Trout's Outreach and Engagement Manager, and I'll be your host today for this webinar alongside our incredible speakers. Yeah, and so just to give some context, this webinar is being offered as an event that's part of CalTrout's current Migration Matters campaign. And some of you may have seen that we're sharing a lot of videos, blogs, we're putting on events and other content looking at why fish migration happens, how it impacts our landscapes and communities, and the tactics that we use to monitor fish migration. And we're doing this just to ensure that that we're spreading the word on this and really want to be giving some education about why native fish migrate. And just some other quick notes, we decided to launch this campaign to highlight the miraculous journey that salmonids are undertaking all over the West Coast and to bring attention to the disruptions that have occurred in migration routes. And we hope that zooming in on this kind of niche corner of fish conservation will contribute to a culture that understands the importance of science and monitoring and also lets CalTrout staff talk incessantly about connectivity, because that's what we like to do. Maybe some of you as well. And so just really quickly, we have an incredible lineup of speakers today. We have Jacob Katz with us, CalTrout senior scientist and Central Valley Regional Director. He'll start us off by framing migration, giving us an overview on why salmon move. Then we'll dive into a case study of migration on the Klamath River with James Whalen, who's our Klamath River project manager. And we'll look at what's going on there with fish movement in the Klamath Basin now that the dams are down, and what monitoring tactics are being used to understand where fish are going and what they're up to. And then finally, CalTrout South Coast Regional Director, Sandy Jacobson, is going to tie this all together for us by explaining why fish migration matters and what successes and challenges we're seeing in restoring fish migration across the state. So just a couple things before I pass it right over to Jake to get into it, is that this webinar is recorded. And then the other thing is that please feel free to submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll be collecting those. And we'll do a Q&A at the very end. And I know that we won't get to everyone's questions. So what we'll be doing is sending a follow-up email where we try to answer as many of those as possible, or even maybe post them as a blog. So thanks all so much. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Jake Katz, our CalTrout senior scientist, to get us into framing migration. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Molly. And thanks everyone for joining us. It is such a pleasure to be part of this CalTrout community and to get to work in this marvelous state where salmon truly matter. And so why did salmon move? Why did, known for this amazing thing to be born in the clear waters above, the clean gravels of our headwater streams. And Rachel, maybe just jump into the next slide here. They're these amazing, sleek animals, an adult salmon, chrome and silver coming in from the ocean and into our rivers up and down the West Coast. And why do they do that? Why they're so famous for returning to their home waters, traveling hundreds, thousands of miles. But there is a real reason for it, a biological imperative. And at its heart, it's really simple. It's much safer to spawn, to breed, to reproduce in the shallow, cold waters of our headwater streams. But to get big enough to make a lot of eggs and to make big eggs that produce strong, healthy juvenile fish, well, for that, you need a lot of food. And the food is out in the ocean. And so this migration for each one of these life stages of the salmon, the landscape, the riverscape, if you will, needs to provision the key resources necessary for that life stage to move to the next, to matriculate, to go into the next grade, to continue this cycle of life. And of course, that happens not just in the rivers, from the headwaters to larger streams, through the estuaries, but out into the ocean. And in the ocean, our salmon stocks swim literally thousands of miles. The salmon that come out of the Sacramento and San Joaquin River in Central California, those are the main stocks that move up along the California coast, up into Southern Oregon, and provide the mainstay of the ocean fishery, not just for Northern California, but also for Oregon moving north. But stocks from farther north will go as far up into the ocean as the Aleutian Islands. And different stocks have different migratory routes in the ocean as well. Next slide, please, Rachel. The key piece here, though, is that this life cycle made of links consisting of each life stage, and each life stage depending on specific conditions, specific sequences of events that give that life stage the biophysical conditions, both the food and the water depth, the water velocity that it needs to make it to the next, to complete that cycle of life. In order for that to happen, right, every link in the chain must be present. Next slide, Rachel. And only takes one break to interrupt that entire process. That a salmon life cycle, like any chain, is only as strong as its weakest link. And that means that when we as people, when we think that a river is just a thin blue line down the map, when we envision and imagine fish just using rivers as highways between where they spawn and the oceans where they feed, we miss the true understanding. We're not seeing the world like a fish. So when we think that a fish belongs in the river and the river belongs in its bank, and when we interpret the way that rivers work, and maybe we go back one, Reach, when we interpret that that idea of what a river is and how fish use them that simply, what we lose is the ecological understanding of what it means to be a fish and how fish use rivers. And now we can move forward. And the issue here is that human endeavor, human efforts, whether it's farming or moving water to places where it's, from where it's relatively more abundant in the north to the places where people live in the Bay Area and Southern California, or if it's about flood levees that protect us from severe storms, all of that infrastructure has the capacity to interrupt those life cycles. We have tens of thousands of miles of levees that keep those juvenile fish, the small fish on their way down to the ocean, from getting out of the river channel, out into the wetlands where the food is. And the top part of this picture right here shows a salmon from the Central Valley. Hundreds of millions of fish that size can be made in a good year. But if they don't get out of the river channel and onto a wetlands, they can't look like that bottom fish. These two fish are exactly the same age. In fact, the one on the top is 4 days older. But the one on the bottom spent 3 weeks in wetlands connected to the river and was able to access those foodstuffs and therefore grow big and strong and healthy. That fish is going to survive in the ocean and come back as an adult. But when it does, next slide, we know that California's rivers are primarily dammed. Many of our rivers more than once. And we understand that those dams, right, when an adult salmon hits its nose up against that dam, that's a serious interruption of that natural process. And for a long time, that gave us serious pause. But we have real good news. And if we go to the Klamath, next slide, where J.C. Boyle Dam was present just months ago. And now it looks like this. Next slide. Free passage, right? Oh, well, that's Copco. That's Copco 1 right there. Now the next slide. Where's Copco 1 now? It's gone. There it is. That's what the river looks like in that spot. And Iron Gate, the largest and lowest of those Klamath dams. Our next slide. Here it is, a big pile. Oh, Wow, those got mixed up. Keep going. We'll get Iron Gate. That's where JC Boy. There's Iron Gate. And then the next slide. What's it look like today? There it is. For the first time in 100 years, salmon on the Klamath River have free reign to move up all the way up past the Oregon border to access the clean gravels of their spawning tributaries. And to look at that, you don't want to listen to me. Let's actually have a moment of Zen with the salmon themselves. And we got a video here. Hopefully it plays. Our own Mikey Weir just shot this last week. So I'm going to shut up and let you go up Jenny Creek with returning Chinook salmon.
Rachel, let's go ahead and pause this really quick. We're not getting sound.
Well,
And I
without
think
the sound, that's just fine.
yeah, we can
yeah.
do without sound. And we'll go ahead and share this. We're gonna go ahead and share this link with you all. Sorry, Rachel, go ahead, play it again. And we'll just do no sound. We'll do a Zen moment, like Jake was saying, We'll go ahead and share this link with everyone so that you can watch it with the sound.
Imagine the swirling, gurgling sound of the river running down through its gravels. So after being blocked for over 100 years, this is drone video of lower Jenny Creek, and you can see dozens and dozens of salmon moving through, spawning, finding mates, turning over that gravel to create redds. Into those redds go the most amazing thing. They're not just eggs. What you're talking about is the condensed marine energy, the oceanic energy. These fish have brought back the 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 essence of the ocean, those nutrients and that energy up. Look at this. Look at that animal. Look at what it's doing. It's pushing water down against the bottom of the stream to dig out a depression, and into that depression, that female, the hen, is gonna lay its eggs. And it's going to move upstream and do that again, and the gravel will go back and cover those eggs. And what that really is these are fish moving against gravity. Think about this, right? Water moves down towards the ocean. With it goes sediment. That water is grinding the mountains down and putting in. Did you see that? They're dropping that. That was a female hen salmon dropping its eggs, and the male coming in to squirt its milk in there to finish that cycle of life. Um, it's amazing what these fish will do when we give them a chance, when we give them a river they can recognize. And that's what CalTrout's doing in the Klamath, in the Sacramento, in the streams of Southern California, in the Great Eel River on the coast. And with that, hand it back to you, Molly, and we can send it over to James, who can tell us about what's actually happening in the Klamath.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jake. And just to do a really quick, like something that I heard you saying, I think, in terms of us framing migration, it's thinking about that fish need to move to get their needs met and to be healthy, and then to be able to bring those nutrients back onto our landscapes. And so without that connectivity, without fish movement, then we're not getting those nutrients. Fish are not able to grow. And yeah, their right to life is totally changed. So thank you so much for framing that, Jake. And we're going to go ahead now and pass it over to James, who's working every day on the Klamath. We're so lucky to have him be able to give us this like tangible case study about how fish are moving, and also just to continue on the good news of the Klamath. So thanks so much, James. Feel free to take it away.
Of course. Howdy, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm James Whelan. I'm the project manager on the Klamath River with California Trout. I've been fortunate enough, as someone who was raised and grew up in Southern Oregon and had the Klamath almost as my backyard for a majority of my life, to be able to work on such a historic project and be a part of everything going on here. And seeing these fish return has just been incredible, an incredible experience for everybody involved. So we can go to next slide. So, like Jacob mentioned, and I'm sure everybody has heard, the dams are out. It has been a bit over a month since the breaching of the coffer dams, which are these smaller dams that are placed behind the large dams during the construction efforts, and those have been underwater since the dams were initially constructed. This is what Iron Gate Dam, which is the largest and farthest downstream dam, looks like now. As you can tell, a lot of material was moved and actually put back into the area where that material was originally taken from. So they kind of refilled that hole. But when it comes to what's going on with fish migration and what these fish are doing on the Klamath currently, Chinook salmon have returned this fall. The fall run has come back through. They have ran well and clear through where Iron Gate originally was, which was kind of one of the big questions. Are these fish going to move up into these reservoir areas where they haven't had access to between 60 and 100 years, depending on which dam you talk about? And within a handful of weeks, fish were all the way up, crossing the Oregon border into the J.C. Boyle footprint and everything up there. So when I kind of think about the Klamath River, I think about it as a large river that spans multiple states, multiple agencies, different rule sets with things, but fish don't see these state lines. They just run all the way. They go into all the different tributaries, whether it's Jenny Creek, Shovel Creek, Spencer Creek, these huge spawning tributaries that the resident fish that were stuck behind these dams have been using. And we were curious, are the returning fish going to be using them? And with the current environmental conditions, I'm sure everybody kind of heard different news cycles going around with how the water quality was through time post dam removal. As someone who is on the river 2 to 3 days a week, swimming in the water 2 to 3 days a week, I can personally tell you the water quality is incredible now. I mean, each day I'm there, I'm seeing the clarity increase. The temperatures are cold. I can vouch for that. I'm in a wetsuit when I do this time of year. It's about 27 degrees air temp and very cold water temp. But we're out there as much as we can to try to see where these fish are going, what areas they're using, and we're consistently seeing this quality of the river increase with these dams coming out. So what we do to monitor where these fish are going with a large group of partners, whether it's NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the tribal nations that we work with, all the Yurok, the Karuk, and the Klamath tribes, and all of our different sponsors, is we're out there on the river as much as we can be. We are netting fish, we are tagging fish, and we are tracking these fish to see where they're going and what habitats they're using. Technology-wise, we are using two different types of tracking methods. We are using what are called pit tags or passive integrated transponders. They're about the size of a grain of rice, and they can just be implemented into the body cavity. And then as these fish move through these systems, different agencies and our different partners have what are called pit tag arrays set up throughout these different areas. So as a fish passes over that, it pings that they were there, and we know that fish passed by. But like a pit tag says, it's passive. Another technique we're using are what are called radio tags or radio telemetry. We are implementing these tags externally on the body, and they are an active way to track these fish. We have stations set up along the riverside as almost checkpoints that we can see these fish pass by. And these radio tags are transmitting a radio signal so that as we go by with mobile trackers as well, we can find those fish in real time and see where they are and what they're doing, and we can go get eyes on that individual. Another technique we're using is sonar. So we're using an actual sonar camera, or as I kind of like to describe it, a very fancy fish finder. If you're into fishing, if you've been out on boats, depth finders, and you can kind of see individual fish on the bottom. We're using a variation of that. It's a camera that is set up in the water and can shoot a beam of sound across to the opposite riverbank. No matter how dirty the water is, no matter what the clarity is, we can pick up individual fish swimming by and see the motion of them. That sonar is placed around the old footprint of Iron Gate Dam, and we're using this as a station to count individual fish as they move up to get a better understanding of, well, how many fish are moving into this area. There's visual surveys going on, whether it's going on boats and looking for individuals, but actually getting a solid comprehensive count, we're hoping the sonar is going to come into play on that. And then kind of how we decide on where to focus our monitoring efforts gets difficult, especially when you're talking about something on the scale of the Klamath River and the scale of these reservoirs. For the radio telemetry, like I said, they're kind of set up as checkpoints along the river. So we have them at the locations of the previous dams so that we can get an understanding of how and when these fish are moving by those old dams. And then we have them extending all the way through the upper Klamath Basin through Klamath Falls, Oregon, through the upper Klamath Lake and into the headwater streams of the Wood River, the Williamson River, and the Sprague River, which are these large spring river systems that historically were great spawning ground for these species and currently are for resident salmonids and trout in the area. So hopefully we'll be able to track these fish all the way through into their historic habitats. You can go next slide. So kind of the big question, and especially for this first year. This first year was, well, we haven't seen fish here in almost a century. How do we consider a monitoring effort on the scale of success? And that can be tricky depending on who you talk to. And for me, this is a long-term project. We have to take these little victories and view them as being just as important as some of the large scale stuff. Getting our equipment out and deployed and running correctly and getting tags on fish in these areas, such as what's photoed here, the exit of Ward Canyon. Just downstream of the old Copco dams, that's the old Copco powerhouse right there, and that's one of our netting locations. We want to get these fish tagged in this location and see their movement upstream. To me, it may seem like a little victory, but that is a huge part of this, even just getting this information on these fish going into novel habitat for them. And for me, I'm hoping this project will help determine whether there is successful passage of adult salmon. Originally, that was the idea. And then turns out only took a couple of weeks. Let's see, Molly, yeah, that's a great point. So, Molly, thank you for the question. Talking about kind of what we expect to see numbers wise, I mean, it can be tricky. As of now, we're seeing hundreds of fish move into these areas, whether it's Spencer Creek, which CDFW has a video we're on, and they've counted well over 100, 150, 200 fish, whether it's Jenny Creek, and whether it's Spencer Creek on the Oregon side, we're seeing well over 100 fish. We're seeing triple digit fish everywhere. But why it matters to know kind of what the populations look like is we can then model what the juvenile numbers leaving the system are to kind of repopulate an area. That is a huge part. So you have the actual number of returners coming into the region, and then you can estimate kind of based on size and how many individual males and females, how many babies you would expect to leave. And that's kind of how you repopulate an area that hasn't seen individuals. If only a handful move into those systems, the amount of juveniles that leave, thus returning a few years later, like Jacob was talking about, won't be sufficient to really repopulate an area. So having these different monitoring techniques and being able to see the actual number of fish returning will help us get a better understanding of maybe how quickly this area will repopulate with a wild population of salmon, or whether it's Chinook, coho salmon, or the steelhead returning to the area. There's multiple species coming back in. And me personally, I'm extremely excited about it. I'm lucky. I get to be on the river handling these fish weekly. So I'm just blessed to be a part of this. And I think that covers everything I wanted to touch on. It's always evolving. There's always new information coming out every week that we're out there. So thank you for letting me chat with y'all.
Thank you so much, James. Yeah, super interesting info, and just thinking about how critical monitoring efforts continue to be this thing that's really hard to get our our agencies and funders on board with supporting, because it's this kind of nebulous thing, but yet it's like this core component of understanding fish populations on landscapes. And it's when we know what's happening with fish populations, we can understand if our restoration efforts or our connectivity efforts are having an impact, especially, yeah, in different regions all over the land. So thank you so much for just illustrating some of that, James, and really looking forward to continuing to get the updates from you and sharing those out. So thank you. And we're gonna just hand it over to Sandy Jacobson, our South Coast director now, who's just gonna help us understand, yeah, a little bit about how this looks statewide, some successes, and who's just gonna wrap it up for us. So Sandy, we're doing great on time, so definitely no need to crunch. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Molly. James, it's just fantastic to see that. I'm so glad that you and the whole gang are out there getting the data and being able to share that with us. It's truly inspirational. And Jacob, thank you as always for just explaining our big picture about migration. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about why migration matters. Give you some examples of success stories. James has just been talking about one of the big ones, but also kind of on the road to success stories. So, and take you through a couple of projects statewide that are important for fish passage. So one of the major challenges essentially in working in fish passage and thinking about migration is that salmon and steelhead, they use all parts of the watershed. Each part needs to be connected and functional, and ecosystems relatively intact to support reproduction, rearing, feeding, movement. These are all really complex biological phenomena that needs to operate in unison. This can happen both large scale and locally, from the headwaters to the main stem, to the tributaries, to the floodplain and estuaries in the ocean. It's a large landscape for a fish. So migration is important for reproduction and escape from existential threats like drought, fire, flood, habitat degradation. It's also important for genetic diversity, access to new habitat and food sources, opportunities for adaptive evolution, and community connection. The next few slides that I'm going to go through will highlight some of these aspects of why migration matters. Some of these success stories, what you're looking at right here, and then the on the road to success of ones that are well designed and at least partially or fully funded to move forward. So in terms of why migration matters, reproduction and habitat access is the most obvious. The success story that James has just been talking about, this is in Jenny Creek. This is from Mike Weir. It restores access, removal of the 4 Klamath dams. It restores access to over 420 miles of river habitat. They've come back with record speed, and the key thing is reproduction and feeding, as well as access to new habitat. So I know that it's important to track to see how many are coming back, to look at how many are outgoing and will come back in future years. But truly, it will be inspiring to witness the rebound of salmon populations in the coming years now that this decades-long effort is completed. Next, let's go to the next one. So on the road to success in Northern California is Scott Dam removal. So this is part of the Potter Valley project to remove Scott Dam in the Eel River to restore access to about 288 miles of historic habitat. In 2023, PG&E announced its plans to remove both the Scott and the Cape Horn dams on the Eel River as part of its license surrender and decommissioning of the Potter Valley project. More recently, in March of 2024, both partners and stakeholders met to select a design alternative for a potential future diversion from the Eel River to the Russian River that balances both needs of water users and fish. Lots of parties involved, lots of negotiations, but it really sets the path for migratory success. And dam removal could start as early as 2028. And let's go down a little bit further south. Another on the road to success in the more central coast is the Sunol Fish Passage project. This is on Alameda Creek. It's the largest local tributary to San Francisco Bay. And historically, it produced the largest numbers of Chinook salmon, lamprey, and steelhead in the South Bay. Former barriers have been remediated on Alameda Creek with the construction of fish ladders by the Alameda County Water District. So for the first time in over 50 years, Chinook, salmon, and steelhead were able to access the upper Alameda Creek watershed. This project from CalTrout will restore access to 20 miles of habitat. And what you're looking at is remove the concrete mat there, regrade the stream, lower the pipeline, revegetate the project area, and restore fish passage. And this is in the context of all sorts of utilities as well. So it's a different sort of project, but also exciting to get that underway. Here's one out of our Chico Shasta region. This is Big Chico Creek fish passage. This project is located on Big Chico Creek. This is an ancestral subsistence fishery for the Machukta tribe. Currently, fish migrations are blocked by a total upstream migration barrier located, as you can see, in the Bedrock Gorge. This is called Iron Canyon, and it's located in a well-treasured Bidwell Park. I see hearts going up. So there are some fans here. This is a wonderful project led by our Shasta and Chico offices and Holly. The fish passage barrier prevents steelhead and spring-run Chinook salmon from accessing critical habitat upstream. So Iron Canyon Fish Passage Project received funding through a single NOAA grant to cover all stages. So this goes from planning through to construction. The result will be passable natural step pools, providing access to over 8.5 miles of cold water refuge. Next slide. And now we're going further down south where there are tens of millions of people, and endangered steelhead are trying to migrate and survive within these altered landscapes. But there's really, really good opportunity for success here, and we are seizing on these to make the most of them. On the left, you see the I-5 barrier, Interstate 5 barrier on Trabuco Creek. This is in the city of San Juan Capistrano in Orange County. On the right, you're probably many familiar with Ringe Dam removal in Malibu Creek. This is in Los Angeles County. So on the left, the remediation of the I-5 barrier. This is a technical hydraulic and structural solution. I'm fortunate to work with NHC, Mike Love and Associates, and Gannett Fleming to construct 600-foot nature-like fishway ramps that will transport endangered southern steelhead through a 1/2 mile of barrier beneath an array of 5 bridges. And you're looking at the I-5 right there, but you can also see the mountains in the background. These are the Santa Ana Mountains, and there is dynamite trout habitat up there. So the project integrates ecological benefits with improved transportation infrastructure and public safety while utilizing a broad range of partnerships and tribal engagement to achieve success. So it will permanently restore access to 15 miles of historic spawning and rearing habitat in Upper Trabuco Creek. On the right, the famous Ringe Dam. This is part of the Malibu Creek Ecosystem Restoration Project. And it is an obsolete dam. It has been for years. It's a 100-foot concrete structure, 3 miles in from the ocean, and it houses 780,000 cubic yards of sediment. And this is trapped. It's supposed to be destined for the ocean and the beach nourishment, but it's been trapped since the dam was decommissioned in 1960s. It was built in the 20s. So it's owned by state parks. It's in Malibu State Park, and an expert technical team is bringing the deconstruction and ecosystem restoration design to 90% by 2026. And this will be followed by possibly removal starting in 2028 over a span of 5 to 7 years, depending on the final alternative chosen. Removal of the dam in the upstream, there's small tributary barriers, there's several of them, and that will restore access to 18 miles of habitat for endangered southern steelhead. So keeping in Southern California, statewide, wildland fires and escape from them, it's a threat for all of us, and the fish are no exception. It's essential for their survival, whether they need to escape, whether it is fire, drought, flood, people. It's just essential, and if they can't escape, they may perish. So this is what you're seeing on the left is a photo of the devastating Holy Fire that swept through Coldwater Canyon Creek in Riverside County in Southern California in 2018. So what's really key about this, as you see on the right there, this is one of 2 remaining native trout populations of coastal steelhead descent in this part of Southern California. There are very few left. And so after the fire, the stream filled with sediment upon the first rain, as we know that this is the danger stage if the fish make it through the fire. But the state, federal agencies, and the Riverside Corona RCD, who take care of these fish, had the foresight to rescue the trout before the rain and brought them to a safe location in the San Bernardino Mountains. And then due to really heavy rain years, they were returned 2 years later, and they are successfully breeding and thriving. So this is a tremendous success story and sort of a twist on migration. It's a facilitated migration. I know it's really, I see the hearts again. It's pretty remarkable. So migration is really important for genetic diversity. And what you just saw was one of very few native trout populations left behind barriers. These are the remnant populations. And so they don't have access to genetic diversification. So migration allows genetic exchange in a more robust population in terms of viability and adaptability. So without genetic mixing, there is increased inbreeding and susceptibility to extirpation. So what you're looking at here is one of my favorite dendrograms. This captures a large amount of genetic information from fin clips and comparative DNA analysis from discrete individuals within discrete populations in Southern California streams. Each line that you see represents a population in a specific location, and the length and the location of the lines illustrate how closely the certain populations are related. So you can see that kind of on that upper right, these are the hatchery introgressed populations, and there are some from traditional stocking in Southern California, but the ones that we really focus on, you see that big blue blob there in the San Gabriel River system. Those are the native trout that remain. And then you see the 2 on the lower right, that's the West Fork of the San Luis Rey and the Coldwater Canyon fish, that those native trout that you just saw. So these are highly inbred. They have the lowest allelic diversity in California. So that is compliments of the Garza Lab and project that we ran over a decade ago now to really identify where these guys are. So it's really important to get genetic mixing. And then just kind of taking you through just 2 more examples of why migration matters. Community connection. And it allows access of salmonids to new environments to drive adaptive evolution and food web diversity. As we open, what you're looking at here is in Prairie Creek in Northern California, out of our Arcata office. It opens up floodplains and access to the ocean. It's fundamentally important for successful migration. It offers the opportunity. This project in particular is fantastic, and it's moving right along into its second phase, and has many partners and engages with tribal nations and many different community partners and funding agencies. So in the Prairie Creek floodplain restoration project, it's located 3.5 miles upstream from the ocean, and it's important to salmon and steelhead in the Redwood Creek watershed. So this site is the last downstream opportunity to provide floodplain rearing habitat in the system. At the project site, the creek is being transformed from steep-sided banks and a disconnected floodplain to a connected series of off-channel ponds and backwater features with large wood installations to create habitat for young salmon and steelhead. So CalTrout works closely with partners, Save the Redwoods League, California State Coastal Conservancy, the Yurok tribe, and a team of local consultants to implement this project. So from 2021 to 2023, the project team built 11 acres of riparian and wetland floodplain habitat and removed 9 acres of asphalt from the mill site. And many of you are familiar with this, and I saw it not too long ago. It's super impressive just on the scale and the complexity, and it just feels like success, and it's on that track. And this year is no exception. And then lastly, the Central Valley Floodplain Initiative. So Jacob has been leading this for a number of years, and Jacob Montgomery as well. So this project supports growth of floodplain fatties that we saw early on these flooded rice fields off season. There are so many opportunities for innovative techniques to improve migration of Central Valley river systems, but also many opportunities to bring diverse interests to the table, building coalitions for the good of the environment. In a landmark moment for California's water management and environmental conservation, CalTrout joined state and federal partners in October of this year to witness the signing of a groundbreaking MOU. This focused on floodplain restoration in the Sacramento River Basin. So this agreement, which it brings together agencies, overseeing water, agriculture, fish, wildlife, public lands, flood control. It marks a significant shift towards collaborative landscape scale restoration projects. So this fish food program is expanded into tens of thousands of acres to demonstrate its value at scale. And we're super excited for the future of all of our opportunities to improve migration and address these challenges, and really to push forward on the circle of life and realize the power of coalitions that can restore cell-mounted migration and engage their surrounding communities and heal the watersheds themselves. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sandy. That was an amazing, just like statewide journey that we went on with you, looking at all these different all these different projects statewide. So thank you so much for that. And also always really appreciative for the background that Sandy brings to us in genetics, and thinking about that piece that you were talking about migration being meaningful for genetic diversity. If we know, as many of us do who are in science, that biodiversity is essentially the framework for resilience. Like, we know that biodiversity is what makes our ecosystems resilient. Just like you saying that out loud, Sandy, I was like, ooh, connection. Like, we need to have migration to have a generally resilient landscape when looking at all these different species. So thank you so much. We're going to get into a couple questions now. If folks, we've definitely collected a few throughout the speakers. Thanks so much for submitting. And if you have any questions, now is the time. So feel free to use the Q&A feature to send us any questions that came up for you, but we're just going to go ahead and get started with a couple here. So we have a question from Anna, who asks, can you talk about how restoration design may have included considerations for river access for firefighting crews? And I'm curious if we have any expertise on this with this group to talk about. I know a lot of us know about essentially the considerations that are being made for water take and access for wildfire, but curious if anyone feels able to speak to that, Sandy, Jake, or James.
It's not a major consideration in that most of the time in these major fires, within these projects that we're working on in the river, the access is already provided down to the river. So, it's not that it isn't really important. I hear you loud and clear, but the crews can get access to the river where they do it. We're not tending to create additional access, whether it's for us or for anyone else. But that idea of integration, of really thinking about how management of forests affects the management of the river, affects the management of the fish, affects the management of water distribution within the state. Understanding that from ridgetop to river mouth, from forest managers to range managers to water managers to fisheries biologists, we have to be understanding the ways in which not just our work interacts, but that we're all part of the same fabric of landscape, that we're all threads in the same tapestry of really creating an integrated and cohesive ecology. And that it's exactly ideas and thoughts like this one, Anna, that make that actionable, that make that real. And so in this case, most of our river restoration isn't going to substantially change a crew's capacity to access the river, but that we are out there thinking about how fire and forests and water patterns and rivers are really the same issue all the time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jake. And I'll just say too, Anna, there is so much, as I'm sure you know, if you maybe you're a fire practitioner, if you're asking this, but there's so much going on at the nexus of fish and fire. And so we may follow up on this question in like a follow-up email, as there's, it's especially this is on the mind in different regions throughout CalTrout's work. So thanks so much for that question.
Yeah. Wait, Wally, real quick, just
Yeah.
to if follow up to if we don't see it, I mean, this is why CalTrout's so awesome. Maybe we're not tracking that yet, and we need to be. So please follow up if there is a way in which you think that needs to be more front and center for us. Let us know.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Totally. Yeah, we'd love to be in that conversation. Okay, so we have a couple really good ones looking through. So we have a question here. Have any adult salmon been transported by any agencies farther up the Klamath, or are salmon left to find these spawning areas naturally? James, would you let us know about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. No individuals have been transported by any agencies. These fish this first year are naturally finding these spawning grounds all on their own. There are no plans to transport fish into certain stretches. There are lots of different spawning tributaries throughout the area that naturally they have just found on their own, which is incredible. Whether it's Jenny Creek, Shovel Creek, Camp Creek, Spencer Creek, in spawning in the main stem, we've identified a lot of individuals in these protected main stem habitats that have good spawning habitat and good spawning gravel where they don't feel like moving any farther. They're like, this is good. This is perfect for us. But no, there have not been any individuals transported.
Cool. Thanks, James.
Mm.
All right, Sandy, we have a question. This is just going back to your to the genetics map, and we had a question from Andy about if Malibu Creek is on the DNA Venn diagram that you showed, or like the DNA map that you showed, and anything that you want to add about that.
Yeah, actually, it's not. And that was a separate study that was done outside of the target populations and the target watersheds that we did at that time. But there is data on that. It has been it's been a remarkable journey for Malibu Creek as far as and Topanga next door, when the steelhead, the occasional steelhead do come in. And Rosie Daggett and the RCD of the Santa Monica Mountains has been tracking both the resident and the anadromous populations for years. And so that there's a lot of data on that, but it wasn't particularly shown on that particular that dendrogram. That was a good catch. It's like of like the 120 strings that were on there, you found the one that was missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving us more on that, Sandy. And I also think, I think that speaks to a lot of your work, which is just continuing to push for funding and projects that include genetic monitoring,
Yeah.
and allow us to accumulate more of that information. Is that right?
It is. And,
Yeah.
one of the exciting things now, especially so in Southern California, where there may be fewer individuals roaming around in our watersheds in terms of steelhead, we typically know where the resident rainbows are. So we can do environmental DNA. So this allows you to screen over, a tenth of a mile or more up to, X number of a fraction of a mile of just maybe very few individuals, so that you can cover a lot of ground and try to understand where they are. We can actually genotype them now currently for lineage, unless you actually get a fin clip and run that. But that day will come, and that will be a super powerful technique to cover large landscapes of river and identify where the salmonids are, and then that can help direct where your monitoring goes from there, like do snorkel or e-fishing or something like that.
Yeah, sweet. Thank you so much, Sandy. Okay, so we got a couple other good ones. I love this one. This was asked by Milton. What's one result from any of the CalTrout projects that surprised you or stretched your understanding in ways that you didn't anticipate? And I wonder, I'd love to hear from all the speakers, but let's see who we can fit in. Or do any of you have something that jumps to mind immediately?
Well, let me just start with, 15 years ago, we had this crazy idea that salmon might actually like the swamp, the marsh, the off-channel habitat, you know, that the popular conception was that salmon belonged in the stream, and the stream was just that water between two steep riprap banks. And then some work came out that showed, wow, look, the salmon, when they get out into these floodplains and wetlands, they grow really quick. And then we realized, well, that's great, but there's almost none of that natural habitat left. What do we do? And we had this idea to use agricultural fields that could be flooded to mimic that kind of wetland habitat. And when we put those fish into essentially a mud puddle, I was pretty worried. You know, I didn't know what would happen. But within 3 weeks, when we dipped our nets into that muddy water, and what came out were these just fat, healthy, just, you know, writhing mass of fish again. And it was like, oh. And what often surprises me is when I forget that I should trust the fish, that I should look to the fish. Instead, we're thinking about from a person's perspective. And so in this way, there's one, you know, it happens again and again, but it was a really surprising result that salmon love mud puddles. But what it really means is that we have to reimagine how rivers work and how fish use them, and that's what we're doing in all different parts of our work across the state. Maybe
Awesome.
I'll pass it over to James, and then we'll let Sandy
Yeah.
conclude.
For me personally, and in recent history, is how quickly these fish responded and returned to these habitats in the Klamath. I mean, I was a little skeptical about how fast it was going to take. I was like, oh, maybe the second year, the third year, we'll start seeing fish really start exploring into maybe cross state lines onto the Oregon side. And it was about 3 weeks. It was way, way faster than I expected, which was an incredible outcome. I mean, I can't be happier about that, but it was mind-boggling to me how quickly these fish just went, oh, there's not a big rock wall that I keep bonking my nose into, and all my previous generations keep just running into, and then they get stuck there. Just move that out of the way, and they just beeline it upstream like nothing was there to begin with.
Yeah, Sandy, anything from you?
I do. I would say that it's not surprising, but to me, it is actually phenomenal, just the number of partnerships that are needed to complete fish passage projects. The coalitions of bringing and listening and growing and understanding different missions of either public agencies that might have life and property, that is their priority, or railroads, tribal nations in particular that want to protect their ancestors, their ancestral land and fishing, and convey this to their own tribal nations and youth, and then bring it in with the engineers and the construction crew. There's so many different aspects of doing these projects that it absolutely it's just amazing to be part of them and to really see them through for success, because you know it's worth it to get those steelhead and the salmon up the river.
Yeah, Sandy.
I just want to go with a big amen. Yeah, that's so true. I mean,
Yeah.
everything we do in partnership. And that, yeah, thanks for that, Sandy.
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say, echoing Jake on that, just in Sandy, that was the perfect way, I think, to conclude us on that piece, and just understanding that collaboration is at the core of what we do, and just absolutely CalTrout is not completing these projects alone. So thank you. And yeah, I would just want to say a huge thank you again to everyone who joined us for this webinar, everyone who submitted questions, gave your sweet reactions as speakers were talking. And, you know, we did record everyone's questions that we didn't get to, and we will be answering them in a follow-up email to all attendees of the webinar. So thank you guys all so much. And just want to end on that, you know, something that we didn't do at the beginning of the webinar, which we'll do on our next, is actually just introduce who CalTrout is. And just wanted to give a quick reminder to folks that CalTrout is a statewide organization focused on freshwater and estuarine conservation. And We work all over the state and regional offices where our staff live in the communities where we work. So thank you all so much again, and we will see you at the next webinar. Have a great afternoon.